Hello. Hi. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas celebration. We are so close. We are so close to the end of the year. So I hope you are calm. I hope you are centering yourself and then going from that energy, from a centered place, planning for 2025. I'm very, very excited about 2025. I have a good feeling about 2025 because 2024 was tumultuous. It was a lot. There was a lot going on. And I think there will also be a lot going on in 2025. But overall, I have a good feeling. I have a good feeling, but maybe that is me just trying to self-soothe. Either way, I am sending those same vibes your way. But today, I want to talk about my top 10 books of 2024, the books that I remember giving me such great reading experiences during the year. These, of course, are based on my opinion, based on my taste, and honestly, based on my mood. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Talking about books is fun, but I know, some people get really opinionated about their books. I just wanted to add that disclaimer that it's fine if you read these books and had an entirely different experience. And also feel free to share what your experiences were. Also, the 10 books I'm going to be talking about and some honorable mentions are not ranked in any particular order. I'm not going in any order at all. We're just going randomly, literally in the order in which I took them off the shelf. So we're going to try to keep these short, just my ratings and a brief overview of what the books were about and my thoughts on them so that we won't end up with a video that is 3 hours long. Okay. Starting out strong with Emily Henry's Funny Story. Funny Story was so good. I'm smiling and giggling just thinking about Daphne and Miles. I love this couple so much. I didn't think I would love any couple of Emily Henry's more than I love the couple from Beach Read, Gus and January, but there's something so earthy and real and non-fictional about these two characters that I just loved reading. Summer was a great reading time for me. I had a great time reading this summer, and this was one of the books that started on my summer reading list, and it was such a blast. So it follows the two main characters who get broken up with, and the two people who broke up with them go on to date each other. So out of sheer necessity, the both of them end up moving in together, or she moves in with him, and they commiserate together. They try to heal together, try to mourn the end of those relationships together, but also get to know each other, get to know themselves, and figure out what exactly they want out of the next phase of their lives now that this thing has happened. And then at some point, they decide to fake date each other to make the other two people jealous. But honestly, besides those two people being the catalyst for why they even end up in each other's lives, there's very little about the connections that they make with each other that has to do with the two people. And it was just such a grounded love story. I can't tell you how much I love this book. I fell in love with both of them as they fell in love with each other and got to know each other. And it's one of those things where after the book ends, I kind of feel like these two people can weather actual hard times together, if that makes sense. So yes, that's Funny Story. The second book is The Wedding People by Alison Espach. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But first, with this book, please make sure you check the trigger warnings before you start reading. This book was so, honestly, kind of life-changing, or at least life-affirming for me. It follows a woman who goes to stay at a hotel/resort where she is one of the very few people who wasn't there at that time for a huge wedding. Like basically everybody else at the resort was there for a wedding, and she's mistaken for one of the wedding guests. And she's there to kind of live out the rest of her life. And, it's like a last hurrah because she's in the midst of some really dark days, really dark circumstances, a lot of loss. She's going through a lot of loss at the time. And then she meets the bride, who is this relatively young girl who's getting married to this old man and has so meticulously planned out her wedding and essentially most of her life after the wedding. And they meet each other, and over the course of their stay at the resort, they have this beautiful connection and they establish this life-changing friendship that causes them to basically rub off on each other in a way. This book is about longing and grief and sadness, and somehow still manages to be really funny, like absurdly funny in some of the scenes. It's very dialogue heavy because there's a lot of talking between the characters, but it's not done in a way that is tiring at all, because usually with books like that, that's kind of the feeling that I get, where it's just like the characters going on and on and on about their lives, about their trials. It becomes, really heavy for you, the reader, but that was not the case with this book at all. And most importantly, it was about two people learning and coming to terms with what it means to be very intentional about how you choose to live your life and owning the things that have happened to you, even the things that you had no hand in, essentially finding ways to make peace with things that happen in your life so that you don't move forward into the rest of your life as the victim of your circumstances. Such a beautiful book. I highly, highly recommend it. The third book is A Love Song for Ricki Wilde, which if you've seen my books of the summer video, then you know how much I love this book and how much fun I had reading this book. At this point, it is my favorite Tia Williams book, but that's because I've only read The Perfect Find. I haven't read 7 Days in June yet, but it's at the back of my mind as something that I should read. I just keep forgetting to read it. But A Love Song for Ricki Wilde was so soulful and so full of life. Honestly, without sounding too sappy, it felt like I was in a field of flowers the entire time. Like I just felt kind of light and elevated with the world that Tia Williams built in the book and how the characters like met each other. I think I have an implicit bias because I do like a love at first sight done well. Not lust at first sight, but like a really heavy connection between two characters, like a really, really good meet cute. I'm a rom-com girly to my bones. So when it's done really well in a way that just makes me ache for the two characters as they ache for each other, as they yearn for each other, it's just, delicious. It was so fun. It was so good. Honestly, when it comes to the book, what I will say is read the synopsis, but there isn't much I can give you in terms of description of the book or any details about the book that won't maybe lead to a bit of a spoiler. And for this book specifically, I think you need to go in wanting to just experience the love story. It is obviously two people. There's a bit of time travel. There's a little paranormal edge to the story. So it is a bit about star-crossed lovers, and you really don't know if they will survive or even be together in the end. But I'm not sure I can say much more beyond that. The entire story is set across different time periods and against the backdrop of music and art and just so much self-expression. And the story, of course, explores themes of love and courage and vulnerability and healing and the courage that it takes to leave out all those attributes, you know? Yeah, so A Love Song for Ricki Wilde. If you hadn't heard about it before because you've been living under a rock, you've heard about it, I would give it a whirl. And then the fourth book is Love Unwritten by Lauren Asher. The reason why I chose this book specifically is because it changed my mind. I'm not a huge fan of romances that involve single dads. I'm not always against it. If both people are single parents, I'm totally fine with it. But there's something about a young woman becoming an instant mom that just irks me the wrong way because of my own like personal lived experience. That hasn't been my experience, but there's something about the motherhood propaganda that often goes into those books that irks me when I'm reading about like women falling in love with single fathers. But this book meets all the exceptions to my rules, because the exceptions to my rules are if the author establishes that the single father is a present full parent before meeting this person, then the romance can go full steam ahead in my mind without me having to like draw from real life experiences and start thinking of all the ways in which the romance only makes sense because she is valuable to him as a helpmeet. So yes, that is my little caveat to what makes a single father, specifically a single dad romance, work for me. I went in thinking it was going to be too thick because I'm like, what could you possibly be saying that is like over 500 pages long for a romance novel? But I think at the end of the day, it made sense to me. I know why the story is longer, because with a single parent who is an active father in the child of his life, going into a romantic situation clearly requires a lot of thought, a lot of foresight, a lot of making sure that this is something that actually should happen, you know, before your child gets attached to this person. Now, the woman in this situation happens to be the babysitter. Even though she's a babysitter, she's a person who happens to be a babysitter and not just a babysitter for the sake of the story. And the love makes sense. The relationship, the bond between Ellie, the female main character, and the son, Nico, just makes so it's such a beautiful relationship. The child has AMD, I think, the age-related macular disorder that leads to like progressive blindness the older you get. And I love how empowering it is specifically for the child in the story as well. I think it's so well written. It takes into account the real lived experiences of a child who potentially has to grow into his disability, but also very empowering to those children. I've taught children in the past. Anyone that knows me in real life knows that I lament a lot about how children are often mistreated in our society and often, you know, like they're second-class citizens. They are at the whims of their guardians and their caretakers. And sometimes that can be really rough for them, which I think most of us can relate to because we were all children at some point. So how children are handled in romances between their caretaker and the person who might also end up being another caretaker to them is very important to me. And I thought this book handled it so well. It's so sweet. It really takes time in giving the characters enough time to heal from all their past stuff, but also healing together. And the both of them, in getting to know each other, really do get to learn that they can heal and grow together without having that overarching feeling that they're both flawed and they need to fix themselves in private before they can be loved. It was a very sweet book. I really enjoyed reading it. It was worth it for me. Book number 5 is Between Friends and Lovers by Shirlene Obuobi, an author that I found randomly, like in the most random like TikTok video. And I'm like, I can't believe I've never heard of this person. Let me get her first book. And I read this one, hooked from like the second page. She grips you. When I tell you this book was spectacular, I'm not even joking. It's also one of the books that I talked about in my Books of the Summer video, which I'm telling you, like, summer was a great reading time for me. It was just like banger after banger. And I believe what I said then was I loved how emotionally generous the author was with this story, because she herself is a doctor. And I don't know if the female main character is a self-insert for her. I'm not sure that she's writing about herself, but there have to be similarities because the author herself is of West African descent and she's a medical doctor, and she's writing a story about a medical doctor also who's navigating the pressures of her medical career, a social media career, and a very complicated love life where she has this childhood best friend that she has loved for a very, very long time. And it's one of those things where, like me, the reader, I get the sense that he knows that she's enamored with him and maybe even enjoys it, but clearly isn't willing to do anything about it, or, is just like fine with her being that way in his life. And he's not exactly a villain, but there's something a little villainous about the lack of clarification, in my opinion. But while she's navigating all of this, she meets a third character, Malcolm. And honestly, that's where the emotional generosity comes in. Them getting to know each other, she getting to know this person, getting to learn how to be vulnerable with him learning to be vulnerable with her. And the romance between them is great. The humor between them is great. I think like it's always like something nice to experience in real life or to read when two people just get each other. When someone understands like your very, very specific type of weird. That's how I felt about the both of them in this book. And there are many moments in the book where they reflected a lot on their cultural identity and how it has helped shape how they self-identify or how the world even sees them versus how they see themselves, or how they choose to walk in the world and present themselves to the world. And I think besides the swoon-worthy romance in the book, it really does a good job of capturing the struggles as well as the joys of finding yourself, or finding love and learning to love yourself and love someone else while staying true to who you really are. This was an amazing book. I'm so glad I found it. Next on my list is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And what can I say about this book? Big Magic is about creative living. The tagline is literally creative living beyond fear. But I think with a tagline like that, it's easy to think that you have to be some sort of creative in order to pick up this book or benefit from this book. But what she really does with this book is share her profound insights. And I mean, when I say profound, they seem like really simple, like things and ideas to keep in mind. But as someone who lives a creative life, which she defines in this book as just living a life of inspiration, where you're living from within, living a creative life is not necessarily about the output, about making something that people can see, where you can prove that you have done something creative, but it's more the way you choose to live your life with inspiration, or looking into the world every day with a sense of wonder and joy, which can be hard sometimes. And she talks about that in the book too. So the reason why I put this book on my list is I always want to recommend books like this, because to me, I think a book like this does what most people reach out to self-help books for. And the reason why I always love books like this is because they're not just like a one-time read. It's a companion book for sure, because most of us could do with something that would help us to move through the world just a little braver than we did the day before. It's not about grand gestures. It's not about the big things. The big things are great, but what really carries you through from one big thing to the next thing are the everyday things. And learning to live your life with that amount of wonder, it is revolutionary. It has changed my life. I wouldn't be who I was today if I didn't believe in it. And find this book where someone has done the work of taking all this kind of abstract ideas in my head and actually put words to to them, things about fear, about developing self-trust with yourself, removing the suggestion box that you carry around in the world, seeking approval from other people. Having that put into one compact book, I think is truly, truly a gift. And I love Elizabeth Gilbert and her books, Eat, Pray, Love, City of Girls. But I'm glad that she took the time to write something that isn't a novel, but actually is helpful to anyone who wants to live a creative life now or in the future. I recommend it. Next, we have Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I think I read this in February or March, early March or late February. And I was shocked at how much I loved this book. Not because I was expecting to not like it. I read it as part of a book club pick, by the way. So I don't think I would have read it because I don't think I'd have picked it up. I don't typically read paranormal/fantasy romances, romantasy. I keep saying I'll try to get into it. And I have a little stack of books on my shelf that fall into that genre, but I don't instinctively reach for them. So it was a pleasant surprise when I read it. And honestly, a good entry into the genre, because for the first time I actually felt like I may be missing out by not reading romantasies or the paranormal fantasy genre. Also, I read and listened to it at the same time, and the person who was reading the audiobook, rent was due. My goodness, they were giving quite the performance. I highly recommend, if you listen to audiobooks, I highly recommend the audiobook for Bride, because it was great. It was really, really, really well done, well narrated. It follows two characters, a vampire bride and the werewolf who is the groom. And the both of them have to form an alliance of the species or the clan. And it was a slow burn, which makes sense because it's a marriage of convenience. They literally don't know each other at the beginning while they're getting married. And there's some element of it that feels a little like enemies to lovers, not between the couple, but between like the two families in general. There's two species and there's some mystery involved because they have enemies. Like there's an interspecies war happening that also includes the humans as well as the werewolves and the vampires. But even with the tropes, I think it was still really well done in a way that it didn't feel tropey at all. Tropey, I don't know if that's a word, but yeah, it didn't feel tropey as I was reading it. It just felt like a nice, solid story with a very, very good like backbone and meat. And I like the suspense and the twist. I thought those were so well done. Ali Hazelwood, I know, I've only read one of her books, Love Theoretically. I know that she's very, very good at tension, and it shows a lot in this book and on the pages as the characters interact with each other and with like other people that are not the main couple. I also learned a lot about werewolf lore, and because of some things that I saw in the intimate scenes, I went and looked up. I learned way too much about werewolf lore that I wasn't aware of before. Apparently that's what the fanfic girlies and the AO3 and the Omegaverse people have been reading, and honestly I'm a little scared because oh my god, what are we doing? What are we reading? But I was also really intrigued, just not intrigued to like follow through, because I think I'm way past that at this point. But I think I would have been gripped if it had caught me at a much younger age. My goodness. Anyway, the next book on my list is Margo's Got Money Troubles by Rufi Thorpe. I really enjoyed this book. At this point, I should stop saying that because clearly I enjoyed all the books on this list. But this specifically for me, okay, I think the thing is I'm very enamored with books that center around self-creation. It's like a step above self-discovery. Self-discovery is one thing, right? It's kind of about you finding things about yourself based on how you're moving through the world and how like you're interacting with the world around you. But the creation of self is a very intentional thing. It's a very intentional journey to have to go through. And Margo in this book is 19 at the time when she finds out that she's pregnant. She's going to be a single mother. She decides to keep the baby. And really the only help that she has is a friend, her roommate, who has a life of her own, and her dad, who's an ex-fighter, Jinx, who I love. They're basically the only support that she has. She has very little support initially from the father of her child, but she finds a way to get money from his family. And this book, I'm not sure I would put in the coming of age story, but I think Margo is young enough that I would classify it as a coming of age story. She just happens to be dealing with things that are much more adults than someone her age should be going through. Because motherhood is a lot. It's a lot for a 19-year-old. It would be a lot for a 21 or a 22-year-old, you know? But Margo takes charge of her life. I think that's what I admire the most about the character. There's a certain kind of intentionality and gumption with which Margo makes her choices that is admirable. One of the decisions that she makes in the book, I don't know if this is a spoiler, is she decides to do OF on the side to make money. And making that choice and all the subsequent choices that she has to make as a consequence of all these other things that have happened to her. The way she navigates that, the way you hear her think about what kind of daughter she wants to be, what kind of mother she wants to be, what kind of friend she wants to be. It's the best way I can describe it is that it's very admirable. It was a very beautiful journey, I think, to read about. I think the author does a very good job of showing what the journey can look like for someone who is so young, seemingly unfocused, and I think in our world would be so easy to judge, especially with her circumstances, which I think in our world would be categorized as moral failings, as it is in the world that she's living in. But watching her take charge of her life, living with the consequences of her action without any kind of self-pity or at the same time like self-aggrandizement where she's blaming other people for the outcomes in her life. It's beautiful. It was a beautiful, beautiful story. I highly recommend it. The author also writes in two ways. Like there's this overarching third person voice that is telling the story, and then there's Margo herself in the first person. And I think I talked about it in the reading vlog where I read this book that it was so seamless the way that was done, where you're going from the first person, Margo's account, to the third person narrator's point of view, and it's so seamlessly done. It's also another book that I read and listened to at the same time, and the person who did the reading for Audible was Elle Fanning, and I thought she did a fantastic job telling the story or reading the story. It was funny, it was very punchy the way it was written and spoken. So yeah, great reading experience. The next book is The Ministry of Time. This was such a fascinating read. This book was so fascinating. If it means anything to you, this is Barack Obama's best book of the summer, or one of his best book of the summer. That was where I got the recommendation from. And I was like, you know what? If it's good enough for Barack, it might be good enough for me. But it's something that I think on my own wouldn't have gravitated towards. So when I saw that Book of the Month was offering it as one of their picks in May, I jumped at it. It is a story about the British government. Well, a sector of the British government that first of all is set in the future. So there's a future government project happening where this organization has a device that takes certain agents back in time, and they bring people from the past into the future and see how they will adapt. They very specifically pick people who would have died at certain points in time so that taking them from the time period that they take them won't affect the future that we have today. The present won't affect the present, or, their future, essentially. Now, main character is an agent called the Bridge, or an officer called a Bridge, whose job it is to live with the expat, the person who has been brought from a certain time. So there are many bridges and there are many expats. So she's paired with this naval commander from the 19th century, and it is her job to live with him for the span of a year and help him adapt to the current world that we're living in. And like I said, this book has everything. It's a time travel romance. It's a thriller. There's some action packed in there. It's really funny because, you get to see these people who were clearly from another time, try to integrate into modern day England. So it's very intriguing. And we go back and forth, to different time periods a lot. So there's some historical adventure in there, but there are also themes of love and, romance and loyalty, especially with something so secretive and so delicate, like time. You literally were playing around with time. So yeah, it was a fun read for me. I will say 3/4 into the book, it lulled a little bit, but then it picked right back up towards the end. So overall, great reading experience. Yeah. The last of the 10 before I get to the honorable mentions is The Courage to be Disliked. But honestly, besides me saying this book was thought-provoking and super helpful for anyone who is on any kind of self-discovery journey, which I think most of us are, I think reading this book really could change your life. I recommend it to every single person that I know who asks me for a non-fiction recommendation. It is technically a self-help book, but I like to think of it more as self-discovery because it's not preachy. It is written in very conversational style, in dialogue form between the philosopher and his protege, a young man that he's talking to who has all these questions about how to navigate life, how to let go of past traumas, how to seek freedom within yourself, how to take accountability for your life, how to embrace a better sense of self-responsibility, how to build happiness by rejecting the need for external validation, because none of those things are things that are worth holding on to anyway. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're holding on to the things that actually matter, not the things that you're told matter, the things that actually matter to you and for the life that you want to build. That's about what I can say for this book. It's very helpful. It's very, very helpful. And I have 3 honorable mentions. These are books that didn't make it to the top 10, but are definitely on the list of books that I thoroughly enjoyed and could read again because I like to reread books. So it's a book that I enjoyed reading. I don't mind. I will reread a book that I have as much as I want. I don't care. First honorable mention is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. I loved this book so much. This book, I read 2 books by Kennedy Ryan this year. share this book and Real. They were amazing. This is the second part in her Kailane series that I think the third book is coming out next year. This book is so heartwarming and very empowering. It's about starting over. The main character is starting over at the beginning of the book, kind of, because her marriage just came to an end because she found out that not only was her partner a criminal, he's also a terrible partner and a cheat. So Soledad, whose life was on a certain path and she had tried her best to plan everything, now has to fend for herself and her three daughters in this book. And in the midst of it, she meets this wonderful man, Judah, who is also a single father himself with a present co-parent, but there are complications to their relationship because he happens to be a person that exposed and got her ex-husband arrested. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but she's also really tried to build her life from scratch and learn to stand on her own. But she also learns on that journey to not totally close her heart to love and to being taken care of because of how betrayed she literally went through a heavy, like the betrayal of like the worst kind at the beginning of the book. So, learning to love again, learning to trust herself again, learning to trust someone else, and to be on the receiving end of love again. I loved it. It was really nice. It was really good. Second honorable mention is The Blonde Identity by Ali Carter. This book was funny, like laugh out loud funny from the very, very, very beginning. It is about a woman who has amnesia and literally at the beginning of the book is being chased down by people that want to kill her in Paris because she's been mistaken for her twin sister who happens to be a rogue spy. So now she has to partner without the memory of her own or of her sister. She has to partner with her sister's grumpy spy partner in order to survive and somehow maybe get her memories back and find her way back home. It's funny, it's thrilling, and it's action-packed. It's also really, really short. It was such a quick read. A quick read that took me like 2 months to read, by the way, because I started and I got distracted by something else, by another book. And then like 2 months later or something, I remember that, oh my God, I started that book and I didn't finish. I started over again. But then when I started, I got hooked again and I didn't put it down. But yeah, those are my top 10 books. Let me know what you think in the comment section. If you've heard about any of this, if you've read any of these and you like them, let me know in the comments. If you didn't like them, also let me know in the comments. Why not? Let's chat. But I'm now putting together the list of books that I want to read, my TBR for 2025. And what I usually do is I have a TBR tracker that I set up at the beginning of the year on my Notion planner. I might share that in my planning video, and I'm trying to figure out a way to make it possible for you guys to make a duplicate of it and maybe create your own TBR tracker if you want. And I'm going to figure that out tonight and incorporate that into my planning videos. So yeah, thank you so much for hanging with me. And also, let's slow down and go into 2025 strong and restful and happy and hearty and healthy. I'm sending you all my love. Bye.